How many wells did he dig?
6.
3, I think. Why do you say 6? That's interesting.
Because I think he also dug up the wells that Abraham.
But it doesn't say how many.
Yeah,
I think those are them, probably.
The ones with the same name.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know if there are other ones. That's a good, interesting point. It could be that they're, I always thought it was referring to these same wells, that the ones that were stopped up. Yefeh. Esek Signan Rechovot. Very good. Are you learning something here? Wonderful. Just get the door for me, Shmuel. Thank you. Esek Sitna and Shmuel and Rechovot. Okay. And these wells were in Aza. They were in Gerar, Nachal Gerar. What are the soldiers now in Aza doing? They're digging. They're digging to find not so much wells, but they're digging to find what the Plishtim, the Palestinians, as they call themselves, nothing to do with this ancient nation called the Plishtim, the Philistines. It's a similar turn of phrase, but anyways, they stopped up the ones that Abraham had dwelt. They tried to stop. It's not like we in our concepts say, well, we want to have a nation and we want to build a country and we want to grow and develop it. And we think that's the national cause, is we want to have our own country, want to develop it and build it. It's actually their primary goal in most of the education is that we want to stop the Zionists from having their country. It's not that they grew up on this idea, let's build, and for years they have had opportunities to build something, and their whole primary goal is to stop up the wells which the Jews dug, with, of course, using as a metaphor the second Jew, Yitzchak, the son of Abraham. And they want to stop it up, and that means to stop life, to not have water, to not have growth. And Baruch Hashem, Yitzchak tried not to fight. First one, the second one, even though they seem to be stopping up those wells out of hatred. Right? Sitna is hatred. The second well. First well is Asek. It's like too much trouble. They troubled him. There was going to be fighting, so Yitzchak said, I don't want to fight. I'm a lover, not a fighter. And he went on to the second one, and there they hated him too, even though he was trying to. A well is good for everybody. A well is good for everybody to get water for their fields, for their cattle. Nope. We don't want you here. It's the anti-Jewish presence movement. So he moved on there too. And then finally the third well he found, and there they had a little bit of, it sounds like they didn't fight about that one, and that was called Rechovot. And that's why we all want to live in Rechovot, right? And be fruitful in the land. Hashem has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. That's what we want to hope to do. And then from there he went to Beersheba. So Rehovot is probably somewhere near where Rehovot is today. That's coming up from the south. Out of Nachal Gerar, he was slowly making his way eastward and north a little bit. And so somewhere in this area, that's where the stories of the Parsha played themselves out. I don't know if you've heard before the Perush of the Ramban about these wells. You know what I'm talking about? What do the wells represent?
The temple.
That's right. So the first temple, and it got stopped up. It got destroyed. The first temple it's a form of a well. It's a form of drawing down divine goodness into the world. This is what the temple's for. It's not just a place to slaughter animals. There's a purpose to this ritual, and this God brought His divine presence into the world in the temple. But then the first one got stopped up because it was called Asek. And hitaskuimo, they strove with him, is the translation I have here. They strove with him. According to our tradition, the first temple was destroyed because of the three biggies: avodah zarah, adultery, and murder. Society was not at peace. Itasek means to be troubled, to be turmoil. There was perhaps corruption. It was a corrupt society. And so the second temple is the second well which Yitzchak digs. It's called Sitna. Sitna was called hatred. Why was the second temple destroyed according to our sages? That's right, for baseless hatred, for hatred between the Jews, not because of the necessarily that they were so evil in terms of their faith or their religious practices. There were some issues there, but for the most part, the major problem was not one of idolatry. It was not even necessarily family corruption, but the problem was the infighting between the Jews, different factions, warring factions for control, for politics. And that brought us the second destruction. But we are promised that there's a third well, just like the symbol of Yitzchak, our forefather, who managed to try have a third go at it. And this time, they did not have any striving about it. They strove not, they fought not. There was no fighting against it. And fortunately, we haven't really merited to have a third temple yet. Definitely not to have the merit of having peace and calm with no war and no fighting about it. But B'ezrat Hashem, when we finally get our act together, we will be successful. And finally, Hashem will let us be fruitful in the land, made room for us and be fruitful in the land. And that's the big promise for us that we hope for. The third temple, B'ezrat Hashem, to be rebuilt. This third commonwealth that we're attempting as a Jewish people to create, B'ezrat Hashem, will be more successful than the first two. And the symbol of Ma'aseh Avot Siman Labanim, that the actions of the forefathers somehow foretell. There's like they're somehow, it's like almost like DNA. It's in our DNA that this is whatever played out, how it played out in the lives of our forefathers. It's going to play out again in our history, and we've seen this time and again. This idea that many of the stories that happened to the forefathers, we as a people went through similar types of travails, issues, and this idea of that the wells being like Batei Mikdash, very powerful image. Ultimately, we talk about if you want to reach God, you either you go high or you go deep. Right? We want to get to the depth beneath the surface understanding of the world, the surface materialistic way that we live our lives. We want to go deeper. We want to go to more meaning and connecting to God. So this is the metaphor used in this week's parsha for the wells. I mean, there are probably wells too. We need to live in the land. We need to be able to live in the land, to be fruitful. We need to be able to stop with all the fighting. Now with this latest war, I mean, the drain on the economy is going to be very significant, and Baruch Hashem, we'll be strong enough to and grow from it. But this story of Yitzchak finding his way, he's the only one of the three forefathers who never leaves the land of Israel. He's born in the land of Israel, and stays in the land of Israel, and develops his settlement in the land of Israel, whether it's in the southern region, whether it goes up to Beersheba, and but this is hopefully should bode well for our ability to overcome in the south. The war that primarily right now is being waged in the south. Ultimately, who knows, when he reaches some kind of a peace treaty too with Avimelech after he prevails in the and he's so fruitful and so successful with his Mea Sha'arim. Maybe that could be symbolic of the modern day neighborhood called Mea Sha'arim, where people are very strong in their faith and they are, keeping true to the Jewish traditions. Maybe B'ezrat Hashem will have that too, and we'll have Teshuvah, and maybe we'll even be able to make peace with our neighbors. They came to us begging for peace, and maybe that's a sign after this war. Maybe the Saudis will come and beg us to be our friends. B'ezrat Hashem, once we show them how we can take care of business and protect our own. Be'ezrat Hashem. Then, of course, we have this whole issue of Yaakov and Esav, but we can't go through the entire parsha. I just wanted to say something because it is Thursday, the last class for the week, and finally, when Yaakov receives the blessings from his father Yitzchak, he sees blessings of fruitfulness in the land, the dew of the heavens and the fatness of the earth, plenty of grains and wine, and dominion over our land. So there's a lot of blessings coming to us. B'ezrat Hashem. It's complicated, obviously, as you know. Yaakov and Esav, and Esav had 12 children right away, where Yaakov had to wait for it a little bit longer. Just like Ishmael had 12 children right away, Yaakov, in next week's parsha, gets his 12 children, and B'ezrat Hashem starts to build what will become the nation of Israel. So there's a lot of blessings in this week's parsha, a lot of very meaningful discussions of relationships between Yaakov and Yitzchak and his surroundings, and between Yaakov and Esav, his brother. Story that never gets old, especially if you're a descendant of Yaakov, as the rest of the Bible goes on to describe how the Jewish people are the descendants of Yaakov. The story of what happens to Esav and how he develops his clan. He says he went to his land and developed there, and just like we saw in the book of Bereshit up till now, there's other lines of genealogy. There are other people mentioned. I showed you the chart from Adam to Noach, and how we got to 70 nations, and from Noach to Abraham. But the rest of the Torah essentially discusses children of Yaakov, not the children of Esav. So it must be that we were chosen. As we see this week's parsha, that Yaakov is destined to receive the blessing of Yitzchak from, which is essentially the blessing of Abraham, that special blessing that Hashem made with Abraham. Creating the first Jew, saying, "I'm going to make you a great nation," ultimately gets expressed in, according to our Torah, in Yaakov and his children, who we're called Jews. Why are we called Jews? Probably because we're from Judea, which is one of the children of Yaakov, right? Yehuda. Most of the other tribes were sort of lost in the exile, the Syrian exile. The 10 tribes were lost, and mostly we're called Judeans, Jews. But the point is that we have an illustrious tradition that we are ultimately still playing out from the original stories in the Chumash, which we're reading this week. B'ezrat Hashem, we should be strong to reconnect to our tradition and to have all the blessings that are promised to Yitzchak and to Yaakov and to their children. Amen. Amen. Okay, so that was a little bit about the Parsha. We are learning Hilchot Shabbat, and we're in the chapter, which is just one out of, maybe, how many chapters are there? About almost 30 chapters. Chapter 22 is the one where we've been learning, and we seem to be talking a lot about it. Even though of all the chapters of the book, it's the one that's hardest to define in terms of black and white halacha. the spirit of Shabbat. The spirit of Shabbat, this overarching principle, which stems from the biblical mitzvah of Shabbaton. Not only are we enjoined to not transgress the negative, the prohibitions of Shabbat, not to work in any way of the 39 categories of work, we also have a mitzvah to rest, to have a holy day. How to define that? We have a little bit of help. We said from Yeshayahu, gave us a few terms to use, right? Kavod and oneg, right? And not to walk in the way that you walk on the weekday, and not to talk in the way we talk on the weekday. So those are some directives which help us move from the general category of resting on Shabbat and towards making the Shabbat a special day in all different ways. But then we have many applications which are a little bit, they come later, they come from the sages, and sometimes they're hard to define. We were using the terms uvdin dechol. This is a weekday activity. You're not allowed to be involved in a weekday activity that would transgress that whole idea brought about in Yeshayahu, the whole idea from the Shabbaton. And so how do you define what's a weekday activity? So here it really puts a lot of authority in the hands of the rabbis, the leadership, the rabbinic leadership throughout the ages. Obviously, the sages couldn't be talking about a bicycle. There were no bicycles. They couldn't be telling us what's the rules of an umbrella because they didn't invent the umbrella yet. So throughout the ages, whenever certain society changed and developed all sorts of elements of the way we live our lives, rabbis decided to, the rabbis and the communities together, it's a sort of a dynamic relationship, rollerblades. Are they like a bicycle, or are they like shoes? What are they? So it's hard to define. Till today, I don't think it's absolutely clear whether rollerblades are prohibited or a scooter. It's more like a bike. I think it does, change the character of the day when you've got these kids whizzing around you. Or nowadays, of course, we have the electric scooters, so that even makes it more mundane type of activity using these vehicles. But each new sort of way that we live our lives, the rabbis speak about them, and we have a few more of them that are mentioned in the sages that we have to cover. One of them, let's look. Open up our books, please. Chapter 22. Yesterday we talked about business, we talked about reading material, we talked about games. Let's go to page 150, that's section 14. Okay. Let's say you get a job, and the job involves none of the 39 categories of the work. You get a job to fold laundry, or assuming laundry could be problematic, let's say you get a job to play with somebody's children. There's nothing wrong with playing with children. You can play games on Shabbat. Well, okay, games. Games which are permitted on Shabbat. Jumping, we said for children is allowed. Card games that we talk, educational card games, singing songs is allowed, even teaching them Torah. There's nothing wrong with teaching Torah on Shabbat. It's actually quite appropriate. The only problem with that is that it's a job. You're going to get paid. Now, most schools don't open up on Shabbat, but there are some schools in the old city. There's a famous school where they have classes on Shabbat. A very religious school. It's 365 days a year they have school. Torah never stops. What's this whole idea about a summer vacation? That's not a Jewish concept. We have to study all the time. They put it into practice. They actually have classes on Shabbat. They're a little bit different, they're a little bit shorter, but they do have school. So how can you work on Shabbat? There's teachers, there's people who have to get paid for playing with the children, there's these nannies, they're Jewish. How can you work on Shabbat? Well, it's not called work because it's not in the 39 category, so they're not violating the Shabbat. So it's not called work. But the sages said you shouldn't be making money on Shabbat. Doing activities which it's sort of like commerce, right? It's like what we said, is commerce is a violation of the nature of the day. It's not resting, it's not making it holy, it's a mundane weekday activity. And so how can you do this weekday activity about going to your job, even if it's playing with children or teaching, or doing something or I'll give you another example, a little more practical for some of you guys. If someone makes a bar mitzvah, and they have 100 guests, and they want to serve them food. Can they serve all the food themselves? Usually they hire waiters or kitchen staff, people to serve, to dish things out, to clean up. They have to work. That's work. Can they work on Shabbat? They want to get paid for their time. They're not doing it for free. Things wouldn't work well if there's people. So what do you do? Sometimes you have to have workers on Shabbat. So if you have non-Jews, that's the best. We don't want to rely on the non-Jews necessarily. So let's take a look at how we work on that. Page 150. I'll give you one more example before we go into the text. Let's say your business nowadays, we have all sorts of new types of commerce. Your business is on the internet. You put up a website. You have merchandise. People go in. Ooh, that's a nice sweater. Click, click. Put in their credit card. And then it gets sent to them. You ship it to them after a couple days, 5 business days, 30 days, whatever the deal is. So I'm not working on Shabbat. But my website is. People are going to go in and they're going to make orders on Shabbat. Am I allowed to benefit from that? Am I doing commerce? Is that considered to me? There's so many questions about working on Shabbat where you're not violating any of the 39 categories of work. You're not using electricity. Make it simpler. Internet site is too modern, but everybody knows if you want a Coca-Cola, what do? There's a machine, right? Big machine. You put in a coin nowadays. You can swipe a credit card and right, falls down, and you get your can of Coke, right? So can a Jew own that? Right? Now you see it in big public places, in hospitals and in the big schools. You have this. So someone who doesn't keep Shabbat, but he's thirsty, so he puts in the coin and he gets his drink, and he goes home. He's happy, and you're happy. Your machine made money on Shabbat. I didn't do anything. I just own the machine. Am I allowed to own the machine? Am I allowed to make money on Shabbat? Is that considered commerce? So many questions. Very interesting, right? What are we worried about? Is that considered to be violating a mundane activity that you're not allowed to have done, even if you're totally passive? Let's take a look. Okay. Let's take a look. Page 150. That's chapter 22, section 14. Okay, Yosef, you're on.
Payment for work done on Shabbat.
Sechar. Sechar. What's sechar?
Wage.
Wages. That's right. That's right.
Sages prohibited accepting payment for work done on Shabbat because this included in the prohibition on commerce, even if the work is intrinsically permissible on Shabbat, such as guard duty or waiting tables. One may not accept payment for it on Shabbat. It is also prohibited to accept rent money for anything, whether real estate or objects that had been rented out on Shabbat. Even b'diavad, one may not benefit from money paid for any service rendered on Shabbat.
Okay, so it's not allowed. It's not allowed. You own an apartment. You can rent it out 6 days a week, but not on the 7th day. The 7th day, for you to take rent for that, that's commerce. That's commerce. It's business. You're not allowed to do business, even if you don't violate the 38 categories. It's a rabbinic prohibition, where sages say that that's called sechar Shabbat. You're getting money, wages. You're getting reward, utilizing the Shabbat. What do we do? what do we do? Do you think there are a few Jews who care about the Torah who have real estate? Probably quite a few, right? You're looking at one right here, right? I have a rental at the corner of my house that I rented out. Am I violating the Shabbat by taking rent money?
When we say rent money, is it like swipe by a card or they send it online? Or
It doesn't really matter, but they don't pay me on Shabbat, it's true. They pay me afterwards. But they're paying me for the use of the house on Shabbat. So, go ahead. Let's see. In contrast,
payment for work done on Shabbat may be subsumed weekday payment. For example, an agreement may stipulate that the worker will do guard duty or wait tables for a few hours after Shabbat as well as on Shabbat itself. Even though in reality most of hours were on Shabbat and the payment is normally for those hours. As long as an agreement was reached before the work started that the employee would also work on Saturday night, the compensation covers the hours worked during the weeks as well as those on Shabbat. Thus, the Shabbat payment is subsumed within the weekday payment. However, if an agreement was not reached before the work started, then even if the employee did work after Shabbat as well, each workday stands on its own. The payment for Shabbat work cannot be subsumed within the payment for weekday work, and the worker thus may not accept the payment.
go ahead.
Along the same lines, one may rent out a room for Shabbat as long as the rental period includes time either on Friday before Shabbat begins or on Saturday night after Shabbat ends. A cab driver can rent out his cab to a non-Jew for Shabbat as long as the rental period either begins before Shabbat or extends after Shabbat, so that the Shabbat payment can be subsumed within the weekday payment. One may also collect interest on one's bank account since the calculations are based on the calendar day and not the times that Shabbat starts and ends. Accordingly, whatever is earned over Shabbat can be seen as subsumed within the weekday earnings of Friday morning and afternoon and Saturday night.
Okay, so you see the system. You subsume, you can include the payment for the Shabbat with payment for the weekday. So it's not, I'm getting rental money for the seventh day in specifically only one day. Now, if you had, even let's say you had a hotel and you are actually going to rent it out for one day, well, as long as that one day includes a few moments before sunset and a few moments after the stars come out, either one of them, you're not actually only being paid for the Shabbat, you're being paid for the it's the payment for Shabbat is included in the payment for the weekday, and so it's not the rabbis were lenient, and they said if you subsuming the payment within payment for weekday activity, weekday provision, commerce, then it's not directly sachar Shabbat. It's sachar of the weekday with a little bit of Shabbat included. Obviously, it's a little tricky when it comes to a waiter. The job is on Shabbat morning between 10 and 12. That's when I need your help to wait the tables, to serve the kigel and the cholent at the kiddush. That's the only thing I'm doing. I'm making a kiddush. How do you do about that? So, even there, we have to find a way. First of all, as he wrote on page 150, first of all, you have to make the arrangement ahead of time. You don't just tell them to work and then pay them for their activity. That's a problem. You have to, ahead of time, make it in the contract that the work is going to include something before or after Shabbat. So even if somebody who's going to come wait the tables between 10 and 12, you have to hire them maybe to clean up a little bit after Shabbat finishes. Maybe they should come and set up a little bit beforehand. Maybe we could even consider the fact that you call them ahead of time and they have to get ready in order to be ready to come the next day. That readiness activities can be considered to be part of the job that they're paid for, and then the Shabbat activities for those few hours will be subsumed with the readiness, preparation, or the cleaning up issues. Okay? let's turn the page, and I already told you the biggest problem with people who work on Shabbat is who works on Shabbat almost every week.
Nurses, doctors, policemen.
True, yeah, but they're usually on a salary for the whole month, right? So it's not a day by day thing. They're not paid by the hour, and so it's less of a problem. That's clearly you can reach a situation where the Shabbat work is subsumed with the weekday work. But who works sometimes primarily on Shabbat? Rabbis, right? We talked about it before. The rabbi works on Shabbat. So, but obviously he has to prepare his drasha before Shabbat, and any rabbi who doesn't actually have. But somebody who's a chazan, it's a little bit more tricky. He's only actually performing on Shabbat. Somebody reads from the Torah. He gets paid to come and read the Torah for this community. It doesn't have their own reader. So you're being paid for work on Shabbat. So some people say you're allowed because it's mitzvah-related job. If it's a mitzvah-related, right, to be a chazan or a Torah reader, then it's allowed. But still, some people say the payment should include work performed during the week. You have to practice, and you have to get ready. So this is... we can still stick to our rules that the payment is subsumed with weekday payment. Okay, so far so good. Now the issue of internet sites or machines, I don't see it here. I know it appears somewhere in the book. It's the internet, of course, is a little bit of an earlier, a newer development. It is here somewhere. There is a discussion. It's not so simple. People who, there's some places where, I don't know if you've ever seen those websites, they actually shut down. The website says if you were to try to see what happens on Shabbat, when you go to the website on Shabbat, it gets turned off because they don't want commerce. They don't want to be selling on Shabbat. But there are rabbis who permit it. The reason is, of course, you're not doing anything yourself. And what about this idea of Sachar Shabbat, that you can't earn money on Shabbat, even passively? So they say, well, when you have to provide the merchandise, you're going to have to package it and ship it and respond. And that you're doing during the week. So the payment that you're receiving on Shabbat is actually not only for the Shabbat activity, it's included with the weekday activity. And there's a discussion about it. Some rabbis say you really should try to turn off your business on Shabbat. Even if it's totally passive and you're not doing anything, you shouldn't allow orders on Shabbat. Now the problem, of course, is that the internet is international. It's always going to be Shabbat somewhere. It's going to take much more than 24 hours. You're going to have an extra 24 hours before, an extra 24 hours afterwards, or at least 12 hours because maybe Shabbat in Singapore, and maybe Shabbat in Australia, or Shabbat in America, not at the times so do you have to follow when you are in Shabbat? Assuming some of the people that you are catering to are non-Jews. But if you're selling a talit, if you're selling Jewish items, you have another problem that you're actually causing a Jew to perhaps, or you're enabling a Jew to use the internet on Shabbat, to use the electronics, and to do commerce. You're basically selling to him things at a time when for him it's Shabbat. Many Jews don't know the difference. Of all days of the week, if they want to buy something Jewish, they want to buy a Chanukiah for Chanukah, maybe they'll remember about it and think about it on Shabbat. They'll go into the website and they'll buy their Chanukiah on Shabbat. They don't know the difference. They didn't study in Machon Meir. And so, am I enabling them to violate the Shabbat? It could be all sorts of issues. As I said, I don't see the discussion here on these pages. But the bottom line is if possible, you should avoid it. But usually, it's not actually a problem of melacha that you're going to be doing, that anybody's going to be doing. Enabling somebody to do a mitzvah, to do an aveira, is not really, your responsibility if they could do the exact same thing on somebody else's website. They could do it without Chilul Shabbat. They could do it on a Tuesday. You're not forcing them in any way to violate the Shabbat. So it can't be your responsibility. But it's a longer discussion. In any case, these are the laws of commerce on Shabbat. So if you do get a job to wait tables or to watch someone's kids or to teach on Shabbat or to be a chazan, maybe one day you guys will be a rabbi. Who knows? One of you may be a rabbi. You have to make sure that the contract is not only for the services rendered on Shabbat, but it's subsumed within some weekday services as well. Okay, let's go up and see another law about the spirit of Shabbat. We don't want the Shabbat to be a day. Sometimes we have this law regarding Chol HaMoed as well. The sages were very wary. Chol HaMoed, who remembers what Chol HaMoed?
The day in between festival.
Well, it's actually part of the festival. So sometimes we call them the intermediate days of the festivals, right? There's a festival, full-fledged festival on the first day of Pesach, full-fledged festival on the seventh day of Pesach. And in between, you have days which are a festival. They're part of the festival. We have a musaf every day, but we have no prohibition of malacha, or the prohibitions are a little bit different. It's not a full-fledged holy day. You're allowed to do many of the 39 categories of work. And the question is, how do we ensure, the rabbis were worried, how do we ensure that the character of the day as a holiday will remain? And one of the things they said, for example, is you're not allowed to push off work and say, well, I'm going to have a few days off of work during the holidays. For example, I want to fix up the cabinets at home, or I want to repaint the house. So instead of painting the house before the holiday, I'll wait. And during the intermediate days of the holiday, I'll have some free time, and it's like a Sunday, and I'll be able to utilize my Sundays to do the housework. He said, hey, you're missing the point. The point of the festival is to enjoy, not to do housework. It's not just a day off for utility, it's a day to celebrate. The reason why the rabbis allowed you to do some of the categories of work is so that you can enjoy the holiday. You're allowed to make a barbecue so that you can enjoy with your friends. You're allowed to travel so that you can go visit the kotel. And you're allowed to do all sorts of activities so that the children can enjoy. But not to utilize the day for your own personal affairs and things like that. Similar concept we have regarding Shabbat itself. Shabbat itself, the sages were worried that even if it's not going to be violating the 39 categories of work, you may use Shabbat as your day off. I mentioned yesterday how, in Israel for many years, the only day off of the week from the work week was Saturday. And so there's no Sunday. You could say, okay, I'll go to Shabbat. Shabbat, I'll go to the synagogue. Shabbat, I'll be with my family. I'll rest. And then I could do all my shopping and all my fixing and all my errands. I can do them on Sunday. That's the way I grew up in America. That you have 2 days off every weekend. But here, we didn't have that for many years. We still don't have that. Friday's not the exact same thing as Sunday. It's, you're preparing for Shabbat primarily. It's not really a day off in the same way that Sunday is. And so what happens is Saturday's the day off. It's the national day off. You get to rest. You get to do your errands. You do your shopping. That's not right. We don't want to violate the Shabbat. Clearly not by doing any of the categories of work. But even if you don't, you are at home. Many people go to work every day, and the only day that they're at home is on Shabbat. So when you know what you can do on Shabbat, you could tidy up. You could, maybe, okay, you're not going to do laundry because that's one of the 39 categories of work, but maybe you will organize your dishes, etc. We're not allowed to, the rabbis made it stricter. They said you're not allowed to use Shabbat to prepare for the weekdays. Whatever is not prohibited, you're allowed to do for the sake of Shabbat itself. So if you want to tidy up in the morning of Shabbat for the afternoon of Shabbat, that's fine. But if you want to tidy up in the afternoon of Shabbat, because on Sunday you're having guests, then you're utilizing the Shabbat for the sake of the weekday. Okay, Yosef? Yeah? You understand? Let's read it inside. Okay, page 152. Stephen, will you read for us? Preparing on Shabbat for weekdays.
Preparing on Shabbat for weekdays and cleaning up the house and table. Shabbat is meant to bring holiness and rest into our life. Making effort on Shabbat to prepare for the week's visitors is further, and therefore the sages forbade doing so. Thus one may not make the bed on Shabbat in preparation for going to sleep on Saturday night. However, one may make the bed on Shabbat so that the bedroom will look nice on Shabbat. Similarly, one may clear off a table so that one home will look nice on Shabbat. For the same reason, if Seudah Sedition is finished well before the end of Shabbat, one may clear the table and put the dishes in the sink. However, if Seudah Sedition is finished on a few minutes before the end of Shabbat, or if people are not planning to remain in the room where it was served, so the clearing of the table is not for Shabbat's sake, but for the week's sake, one may not clear off the table. One who does so is expending effort on Shabbat to prepare for afterward. One may wash dishes if they will be used again at some point on Shabbat. If many dishes were used and only one cup is needed for later Shabbat use, but there are no more clean cups, one may wash all the cups since he could use any of them. Similarly, if he needs one plate but none are clean, he may wash all the plates and use one of them. However, if he does not intend to use any of them during Shabbat, he may not wash any of them.
You have to remember, though, of course, the biggest problem with washing dishes is not preparing for after Shabbat. What's the biggest problem with washing dishes?
Squeezing.
Squeezing, using a sponge, good, and?
Making bubbles?
Not so much. They're not really, that's not your intention, and they're very transitory. They come and go in a few seconds. Bubbles is usually not the biggest problem, but squeezing out the sponge is. And the second biggest problem?
So things being smooth?
No, usually you don't use a bar soap to wash dishes. Most people don't, so there's no smoothing involved with liquid. So what is there? The hot water. Hot water. People who wash dishes sometimes in hot water. Very often it's a problem on Shabbat to use the hot water. So besides all that, let's say you have a special sponge, or you don't use a sponge, you just use a plastic, or you have a, some kind of brush which doesn't retain any water inside it, and you're going to only use cold water. Still, what's the problem? What you just mentioned now is that why are you washing dishes now? You're not going to use them again on Shabbat, so you're preparing for after Shabbat. That's a problem. However, go ahead. One who never leaves dirty dishes.
One who never leaves dirty dishes in the sink even during the week, and who feel that the pile of dirty dishes left in the sink for hours belittle the honor of Shabbat. One may wash the dishes even if they will not be used again during Shabbat, so that his home will be clean in honor of Shabbat. However, even in this case, he may not wash the pot since they are mutzeh and require burdensome work.
Okay, it depends on the type of pots. If you have a big pot, big chillum pot with lots of gunk in the bottom, that sometimes you have to soak it for a couple of hours and maybe a couple of days till you can actually clean the pot properly. So that's already not for Shabbat. But just to clean up the house, those who have been to my house know that my wife likes to have the kitchen clean, and so we do the dishes on Shabbat. Even on Shabbat morning, Sudash Lashit, we usually leave. We leave it on the table even. We don't even clear the dishes. Because, what for? It's for after Shabbat. We're not going to be sitting around at the table very much now. Sometimes I remember in yeshiva, after a meal in yeshiva, what do? You clean up, right? You usually have plastic tablecloths, you gather it all up, and you clean it all up. That's standard. Sudash Lishit in yeshiva, everybody knew the laws. So we didn't clean up the dishes. All we did is we took off the usually there were dairy products, like leftover yogurts or cheeses, put them in the fridge because they're going to go bad if you leave them out. But that you're allowed to do. You're not preparing for after Shabbat. You're just making sure the food it doesn't go bad right now, and that's fine. But to clean up for the sake of after Shabbat, that we don't do. Sudash Shlishi is a good example. All right, this is a tricky one. Next paragraph. One may not fold a talit.
One may not fold a talit so that it will be unwrinkled for the next Shabbat. However, one may fold it so that it will not be left out on Shabbat in a disrespectful way.
So here we have a few different policies, a few different methods. Some people, they don't fold their talit on Shabbat, and usually I don't. I just let it be crumpled up. I put it on the table after I finished wearing it, and I don't fold it because folding in Talmudic times, folding was very much part of the laundering process. Until today, in some laundries, when you a dry cleaner or something, they press the clothes, and then when you fold them, you want to be you make a crease with a press. So then putting them away precisely on that crease that was made, it actually reinforces the crease. So it's sort of like part of the laundering process. And so the rabbis didn't want you folding clothes on Shabbat. It's part of the laundering process. And some people say, therefore, we don't fold. I don't fold my clothes. I don't fold my talit. Friday night, I take off my clothes and put on pajamas. I don't fold them up carefully on the crease like I do during the week. I lay them over the chair or on a hook or something so that I don't violate the prohibition of laundering on Shabbat. Others are a little more lenient. They say, well, first of all, there's a lot of details in the laws of laundering. There's a difference between black clothing and white clothing, and this goes back to the way laundry was done. But some people say, we're not really pressing anything. It's not part of laundering. I'm just folding it up so it doesn't get ruined. If I hang up the pants not on the crease, and I'll have an extra line there where I don't want it when I use the pants next. And so I'm not really making a new crease. The crease is already there. I'm just sort of folding it into the shape. Same thing with the talit. I'm not laundering the talit when I fold it up to put it away. It's just part of the normal use of the talit. So there's some poskim are more lenient. What some people do is a trick that they fold up their talit, because otherwise it does get creases and wrinkles. They fold up their talit opposite, not on the creases. That's one option, or on the crease but in the opposite way. So it's actually detrimental to the crease being as crisp as it usually is. And so if you fold up your talit backwards, the opposite way than what you usually do during the week, then you're clearly not aiding and enhancing this laundering effect of the folding. So, but folding clothes, many people, you have to be careful not to violate the issue of laundry. That's why in some shuls, it's a fascinating thing. You have to learn to have a keen eye. At Mariv, on Motzei Shabbat, in some shuls, all of a sudden you'll see people lifting up their talit and folding it. All of a sudden, the entire shul is folding their talit on Motzei Shabbat. Very unique. There's a reason for that, because they didn't want to fold it on Shabbat. Now Shabbat is over. First thing you do is fold your talit. The Kabbalists even say, don't leave your talit unfolded until the next morning. An unfolded talit is a gathering ground for those evil spirits. So you better watch out. And if you do, you better shake out those evil spirits before you use it again on Shabbat, Sunday morning. Anyways, there's a lot of literature about each and every one of these little practices that we're mentioning here. Another tricky one is tying up the Torah. What do you do after you read from the Torah? Hagba and
Tying.
what's it called? Hagba and Galila. Galila means to roll, literally, but in the Ashkenazi world, right, in the Sephardim, you only have Hagba, because you just pick it up and close it. There's no rolling involved. But the Ashkenazi one, someone has to lift it up. And someone else has to help him to roll it closed and then tie up the, what is there on top of the talit? A what? What'd you say?
On top of the Torah.
That's on top, but before you get to the keter, there's stages. First there's a belt. A belt is a gartel, it could be called, there's a few other names for it. I'm blanking on it now, there's a Yiddish name for it, a wimpel. A wimpel, I think it's called in Yiddish. Anyways, some people make a very beautiful belt for the Torah when a baby is born. They put the baby's name on the wimpel. In any case, what's the problem? Shabbat morning, you finish reading the Torah, you lift it up, you tie it. Wait a minute. And you roll it up and you tie it, and then you put the mantle on top. It's called a mantle, the sort of the dress on top of the Sefer Torah, and then you put it away. Now, what's the problem? There's two problems. One is that let's say the next day is Rosh Chodesh. So when you finish reading the Parshat HaShavua, maybe you want to prepare the Sefer Torah and roll it to the right place so that the next morning when you open up the Sefer Torah, it'll be in the right place. So then you're preparing on Shabbat for the weekdays. You're not allowed to do that. You can't do that. You have to wait till Motzei Shabbat to prepare. What you can do is, scroll it to the reading for Rosh Chodesh and then read. On Shabbat, read a little bit. Just to yourself. Practice. Read a little bit so that you're not only preparing for the next day. You're actually sort of utilizing that work that you did for Shabbat itself, for learning on Shabbat. That's one issue of preparing the scroll for the next thing. But the other one is something we skipped that chapter. We mentioned it briefly. You're not allowed to tie knots on Shabbat. How can you tie the belt?
Normally they use Velcro.
Right. So this is a new creation. It's only been 30 years that we had Velcro in public use. For hundreds of years, we didn't have Velcro. So we had a belt. It's like a rope, a type of like a cloth belt that you tie and you make a knot. So the truth is, for Shabbat morning, it's not a problem. Why? Why is Shabbat in the morning, after you read from the Torah, you can tie up the belt. Fine, we're not going to make a double knot. We'll make a bow. Like your shoes, you're allowed to tie your shoes because you're not making a double knot. You're making a bow on top of one knot. One knot and then a bow. So do the same thing in the Sefer Torah. It's fine. Not a problem. Because it's just like your shoes. Why are you allowed to do that? Because you're going to be taking off your shoes at night. And so that knot that you're making is for a short time. But when it comes to mincha, right, we read from the Torah on mincha, you want to tie the belt? How long is that belt going to be tied for?
Monday.
Until Monday. Until the next reading of the Torah. That's more than 24 hours. According to the rules, tying for more than 24 hours, and according to some interpretations, that's considered to be permanent. So that's a problem. And that's why they came up with this Velcro for the Sefer Torah particularly, or a clasp. Or what if you don't have a Velcro or a clasp, what some people do is they tie the belt around and around and around, and then they just stick it in. They don't actually make a knot. They stick the edges into the underneath, like sometimes you do with a gartel. You don't actually make a knot because that knot could be. It's going to be. And it's actually preparing for the weekday too. So That's here he says, one may not prepare for weekdays even when a mitzvah is involved. One may not roll a Torah scroll to the passage. Anyways, there's a lot of little details here that I think we can skip. You get the idea. We don't prepare for the weekday on Shabbat. What you are allowed to do is the normal routine on Shabbat. So, for example, you put the food in the refrigerator, the leftovers, and you put the dishes into the dishwasher sometimes, even though you're not going to turn on the dishwasher. That's the normal way of clearing up the dishes after Shabbat. If it's part of the regular routine, that's not something done specifically for the sake of after Shabbat. You're not utilizing the Shabbat as a day of errands. Okay. Here he says, in case of great loss, the sages were a little more lenient. You can put food into the freezer if it's going to spoil and so forth. Playing musical instruments we spoke about already. Clapping and dancing. That's actually interesting. On page 157, let's turn to section 18. Yeah, please.
How about this? I prepare food on Friday. Then when I prepare the food, I cook more. I know I also preparing for Moshe Shabbat. So it's I'm preparing for after the Shabbat also.
That's on Friday.
Yeah, on Friday.
On Friday you can prepare for Sunday, you can prepare for Wednesday, you can prepare for anything. It's not Shabbat yet.
So okay.
On Shabbat you're not allowed to prepare for Sunday. But on Friday you're allowed to prepare for Sunday, sure?
But the food now I'm preparing is for Shabbat. But also...
So you're preparing for Shabbat and for Sunday. Both. You can prepare for both Shabbat and for Sunday, no problem. As long as it's not Shabbat yet, it's Friday. So that's not a problem. Okay. So the issue of clapping or dancing is the problem that the rabbis prohibited because it's too similar to making music. Take a look at page 157, clapping and dancing. Shmuel, you want to read a little bit?
Sure.
18.
Clapping and dancing. The sage's prohibition playing instruments includes dancing, clapping, and slapping one's thigh with one's hand to accompany singing, to concern lest one play an instrument and fix it. However, one may clap with a shinui, such as using the back of one's hand. By using a shinui, he is reminded that it's Shabbat and will not end up fixing an instrument. It would seem that very muted dancing, in which one's feet never leave the ground at the same time, is not included in the prohibited dancing.
Okay, so the dance is called in some places the yeshiva shuffle. Just sort of one side to the other side. Not quite dancing. So some people get really into it and they jump in that. Might be a problem. You shouldn't be dancing with, in that manner on Shabbat. Some people are more lenient because it's for the sake of the mitzvah. You're not doing that at a party, at a bar. You're doing that in the synagogue as part of your avodat Hashem. Similarly, the issue is with clapping. Have you seen anybody clap like this? The reason they're doing it is because they're making a shinui. They're not doing it. The normal clap is like this, and this is a change. Some people say, like we're going to see, the next section is what about drumming? So drumming on a drum is a musical instrument. We don't use musical instruments. What if you want to drum on the table? Pretty good, huh? I learned that when I was 4 or 5 years old, right? But it's a tune. But I'm not doing it on a drum. So there's a few different approaches. We're not going to read it inside. He says some people forbid it. They say that's like making music. Making music on Shabbat. You're allowed to sing only with your mouth, but not using an instrument. The table, you're using it as an instrument. So it's an instrument. Some rabbis are, right? As you sing a song, sometimes you keep the beat. That's not drumming. As long as it's not a drum, you can do whatever you want. Rav Melamed comes out somewhere in the middle and he says you shouldn't do proper, fancy drumming. But just keeping the beat, there is a tradition that we keep the beat. Now, why is it so important? And why do we have a difference of opinion on this? Some people say it has to do with your attitude towards music and dance and joy in Judaism. You may be familiar, about 150, 200 years ago, a new movement in Judaism called Chassidut got off the ground, where they placed a tremendous emphasis on joy and singing and dancing as part of our Avodat Hashem. And so they say, why am I clapping my hands? The whole discussion in the Talmud about clapping was if you're at a bar or at a party where you're just or at a lecture and you want to clap. Well, that's clapping, which has nothing to do with Shabbat observance or serving Hashem. But if I'm clapping because I'm excited about, I'm singing, Se'u Shi'arim Rashechem Benasu Pi right? If I'm just singing as part of my religious service in the shul, so then you can be more permissive, especially if I'm not using an instrument. It could even drum, fancy beats. Some people are lenient about it. Rav Melamed, I think, is correct to be somewhere in the middle on that and say that keeping the beat is one thing, even on a table, but you shouldn't do fancy clapping or fancy drumming. Nowadays people can make music with their mouths. Beatbox. It sounds like a regular orchestra. So that might be a little more problematic. But if you're not using any instruments, just your mouth, it actually should be allowed. Beseder. Let's say I think we covered enough here. Obviously, we talked about radio and TV. Many problems. One, of course, is that the sound is changing the atmosphere of Shabbat. You shouldn't use any devices to play music. And of course, in Israel, if you're going to turn on the TV, you're benefiting from Jews that are broadcasting, and that's more problematic. But the bottom line is a weekday activity. We don't even put it on a timer, and even if all the workers are non-Jews, still anything that makes noise on Shabbat is much more serious, and we don't use it on Shabbat. Okay, yeah, question. Yeah.
Is whistling?
Whistling. So whistling is a good question. On the one hand, there's no instrument, right? You just sort of. I'm whistling the tune, a Shabbat tune. I'm singing Zmirot. Can I start to whistle? Technically, it's allowed because there's no instrument. But whenever I would whistle on Shabbat, my father would say to me, "Stop whistling. It's not Shabbat atmosphere." So you can see there's room here for the flexibility I was talking about. It's hard to define there's actually a precedent in the Mishnah that they would, or a similar question is, you snap your fingers. It's no instrument, but it's music. Right? So are you allowed to do that? Similar to the question of, can you drum on the table? It's not quite an instrument, but it is music, and it's not singing. Singing, you could say, of course, singing is allowed. So the whistling, there's a precedent in the Mishnah that they would whistle or snap their fingers. And so technically it's allowed, but there is a sensitivity there that it might be violating the spirit of Shabbat. So generally, I don't think people whistle or snap their fingers, although there is room to be lenient. I think if you really feel like the need to, for some reason, you really get carried away in your Zmirot Shabbat and you start to snap your fingers, I think you can get away with it. And there's no problem if it's not an instrument. Beseder. Let's learn some laws of Muktzah. The laws of Muktzah are quite extensive. How many pages is it? Chapter 23. He has one chapter, but it's 185. It's 24 pages. We're gonna not cover all the details. But what is Muktzah? So let's read the introduction for sure. And according to most poskim, it's a rabbinic institution although some people feel that it's based on the Torah's laws. But and then we're going to learn some of the principles and some practical examples, but we won't get into all the details because it can get quite complicated. Let's start. Okay, you ready to start? Should we sing a song first? Well, it's Shabbat, it's Friday, it's Thursday afternoon, Thursday morning, so let's take out your Sidurim and we'll do one Zemer for Shabbat. One of the most beautiful parts of the prayers is on page 436. My son said that's his favorite prayer in the entire world. Together with the tune, together with the timing, together with the atmosphere of Shabbat, it's Friday evening. You're really entering into a different headspace, and the atmosphere is so beautiful. There is this tune, I don't know who composed it, it's a traditional tune. The words appear on page 436 and 37 to the words Magen Avot. What is going on here on this page? As you can see from the title, it's called the blessing Me'ein Sheva. Me'ein means like. So it's like 7. What kind of name is that? Like 7. What does that mean? What's the 7 that this is like? Anybody? I think we talked about it once.
The brachot and the Amidah.
Exactly. Brachot of the Amidah are usually 18 or 19. And on Shabbat, we only have 7 blessings. And wait a minute here. On Mariv, do we have a repetition of the Amidah? No. But on only one exception is Friday night. Friday night we have like 7. It's a pseudo repetition of the Amidah. We don't actually repeat it word for word. The beginning is the same. As you can see, the Chazan says, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu Elokei Avotenu Elokei Avraham Elokei Yitzchak Elokei Yaakov Hakel HaGadol Gibor VaNorah Hakel Elyon Koneh Shamayim V'Aretz. That's similar to the beginning of the Shemona Esrei, but then he says this paragraph starting with the words Magen Avot. By his words, he was the shield of our ancestors. He was the shield of our ancestors, Magen Avot. And it's a beautiful paragraph, and we're going to sing it together. And then after that paragraph, it sort of summarizes with the main themes that we have in the Amidah. And then the Chazan does say, Elokeinu Elokei Avotenu, which is the central part of the Amidah, ending off with Baruch atah Hashem Mekadesh HaShabbat. He doesn't repeat the Modim, he doesn't repeat the Sim Shalom, he doesn't repeat anything else, but he does say the Mekadesh HaShabbat. The sages instituted this. It's a fascinating story, actually to save lives. To save lives, they said, even though Mariv, we don't have a repetition, Friday night we want there to be a repetition. You know what for? In the Talmudic times, the synagogues were outside of the city. Real estate was very expensive. It was hard to make space. Maybe it wasn't so clean where they lived. Anyways, synagogues were usually outside the city, in the fields. They would build a synagogue, and it was actually dangerous to hang out and to walk to the synagogue and walk back to the synagogue. It was dangerous because outside of the city there were bandits and robbers who could attack you if you were alone outside of the city. And so the sages saw what was going on was a problem. Believe it or not, I know it's hard to believe. None of you, when it comes to anything involved with their Judaism, none of you would be late. You're going to make God wait? Come late for a class, for a Torah lesson? You're going to come late for a service in the synagogue? Unheard of. Nobody would be so disrespectful. But it did happen. In the times of the sages, there were people that were late for the Friday night service. And if they were late, that means that they'd be late they'd have to complete their davening, and then go back to the city all by themselves. And that would leave them in danger of those bandits attacking them. And so the sages decided Friday night, in particular, this is a dangerous time. We want to extend the service a little bit so that even if someone comes late, and they won't be left by themselves in the synagogue and be put in danger. And so they decided to institute this Me'ein Sheva, this pseudo repetition of the Amidah, just to extend the services so that the latecomers shouldn't be put in danger when they come back. This is a fascinating social commentary. In any case, we do have this prayer service, and it is a beautiful prayer service until today. Wherever there is a synagogue, they say this sort of pseudo repetition. It's called Me'in Sheva. First, we start off with repeating the Vayechulu. The Chazan says the introduction, and then usually the congregation sings together with together the Magen Avot section, and then the leader is supposed to repeat it. It's sort of like part of the Amidah of the leader, so he should repeat it. Anyways, are you ready to sing it together? Magen Avot. You see where I'm going to start singing? Magen Avot in the middle of the page. Magen Avot bidvaro mechaye meiti b'ma'amaro hakel hakadosh she'en kamohu המניח לעמו ביום שבת קודשו כי בם רצה להניח להם לפניו נעבוד ביראה ופחד ונודה לשמו בכל יום תמיד מעין הברכות כל ההודעות אדון השלום מקדש השבת ומברך שביעי ומניח בקדושה לעם מדושני עונג זכר למעשה בראשית. It's a beautiful sing-song. It's almost like a lullaby tune. And of course it speaks about, you can read the English, it speaks about how God gives us rest on this holy day of Shabbat, and we worship Him, and with all the blessings that He gives us on this Shabbat. Beautiful phrases. In the Hebrew, it's hard to translate. Gives rest to a people filled with delight and remembrance of the work of creation. So this is very commonly sung in Ashkenazi shuls. I don't think it's such a Sephardi tune, but
People sing this in my Beit Knesset.
yeah, they do. And it's an Ashkenazi Beit Knesset or a Sephardi Beit Knesset?
I think it's Ashkenazi.
Yeah, probably, yeah. Although some Sephardim like the tune so much so that they have learned it. We're in an age of Ingathering of the Exiles, so we have a Ukrainian playing the cello together with an American, playing the violin. There's all sorts of combinations that we're making in this age. So this is you could try to practice it. We could find a recording of it. Should we sing it one more time so you get used to it? And the more you practice, you'll be able to follow along together with the community. It's the only time that we sing this Friday night in the davening. Magen Avot bidvaro mechaye meiti b'ma'amaro hakel hakadosh she'en kamohu המניח לעמו ביום שבת קודשו כי בם רצה להניח להם לפניו נעבוד ביראה ופחד ונודה לשמו בכל יום תמיד מעין הברכות כל ההודעות אדון השלום מקדש השבת ומברך שביעי ומניח בקדושה לעם מדושני עונג זכר למעשה Then the Chazan repeats it, and then he goes on to say, it's a beautiful, beautiful lilting tune for the Friday night. And Hashem should bless us with a beautiful Shabbat, restful Shabbat. And don't be late for the Shabbat service. But if you are late, you'll know that the community cares about you, doesn't want you to be in any danger. And this section was added for the sake of the latecomers. It's part of human nature. Some people are just late. But anyways, that's a little bit for Shabbat. Let's go back and start the laws of Muktzeh. Hopefully we'll finish soon and get started on the laws of just one or two more chapters that I want to cover. But Muktzeh is the last topic that we have left. Well, we only have about 15 minutes now, so we'll complete it B'ezrat Hashem next week, and then we'll make a party because we'll be finished with our quick survey of the laws of Shabbat, 2 volumes. Okay, very clear, very soon, probably Sunday or Monday, we'll be done with the laws of Shabbat, and we'll start the laws of Hanukkah. So, Baruch Hashem. Muktzeh. Okay, Shmuel, you read for us.
Muktzeh, basis of the prohibition. The sages prohibited moving things that are not fitting for Shabbat, and that one puts out of his mind.
Right, so the word muktzeh, the word is to separate off. So when you separate off from your mind that they're not for use on Shabbat, you're not allowed to touch them or actually move them. Touching is allowed. For example, you know that you're allowed to touch a car because you're not going to move it, usually, unless you push really hard. And you're allowed to touch something that is muktzeh, as long as it's not going to move. Moving is the problem. But the word muktzeh means something that is set aside, something that's set aside from use on Shabbat because you didn't think about using it on Shabbat. The classic example we'll see is sticks and stones. They're just, nobody designated them for use. So that's called muktzeh. It's set aside. It's set aside for Shabbat. You're not allowed to handle it, basically. Moving it means handling it. Yes?
If you're going to eat from the cookware without cooking, like basically you're using the cookware as a plate, are you allowed to move it?
Yes. We're going to see that any dish which is designed for human use is allowed, is considered to be a vessel. Vessels that are designed for our use. They're not set aside that we're not going to use them on Shabbat. Okay? As opposed to, for example, your phone or your musical instruments. We don't play them on Shabbat, so they're muktzeh. Anything that's not, you shouldn't handle them. You shouldn't move them from one place of the room to the other part of the room. We don't handle them. Anything that you're not going to use on Shabbat, that's not in your mind, you didn't previously think about that I'm going to use it on Shabbat. There are some people I know, we talked about it the other day, that they're very upset when people are driving on Shabbat. So they throw stones on them. Have you heard of that? Terrible. Terrible. But the problem is, yeah?
My sister was working in the hospital on Shabbat, and she was driving her motorbike to the hospital, and people have been throwing stones at her.
Oi, terrible. It
was during Corona. She was helping people sick with Corona.
Terrible. People are misguided. But they're very upset when they see someone violate the Shabbat, but they're not channeling that upsetness in the right way. Because, of course, you're not allowed to throw stones at the fellow Jew. That's not what's going to convince him that the God is true and we have to keep his mitzvot. The opposite, that's just going to make them angry and hate religious people. So, but let's say you are misguided and you're going to throw stones at a car that's driving on Shabbat. How can you violate the Shabbat? By picking up a stone. It's muktzeh. It's prohibited to handle stones on Shabbat. Maybe they really, they believe what they're doing is a good thing, and they set aside the stones from before Shabbat. Then it's allowed, according to their twisted thinking, that it's a good thing. But you have to set aside the stones, otherwise it's muktzeh. Okay, Shmuel, go ahead. We only read one sentence, but the first sentence explains the word. The word muktzeh means setting it aside and without saying so, it means it's out of your mind. You haven't had in mind that you're going to use it on Shabbat, so it's prohibited. Go ahead.
There are two fundamental reasons for this prohibition. To preserve the atmosphere of Shabbat as a day of holiness and rest. The idea of rest applies to one's hands as well. They should not move objects or be involved with activities that are not connected to Shabbat. To set up a safeguard so that one will not come to do Menachem on Shabbat. We will begin by explaining the first reason. In addition to the Melachot that are prohibited on Shabbat, the Torah commands us to rest and relax on Shabbat, as it states, "But on the seventh day you shall cease, so that your ox and your donkey may rest, and the son of your maidservant and the stranger may be refreshed." Shabbat 23:12. Similarly, we read, 6 days shall work be done, but on the seventh day there shall be a Shabbat of complete rest, holy to the Lord. Shabbat 35:15. In order to fulfill the Torah commandment to rest and relax on Shabbat, the sages established several ordinances meant to protect the spirit of Shabbat as a day of sanctity and rest. One of them is the prohibition of muktzeh. If moving items unnecessary for Shabbat were permitted, people might well spend all of Shabbat day cleaning and arranging their homes, and thus their homes and belongings, thus negating the mitzvah to rest. Instructed the people that the atmosphere of Shabbat should be different from that of a weekday. One should walk and talk differently. Following this line of thought, the sages decreed that people should not handle objects and implements on Shabbat in the same way as during the week. This way, Shabbat is truly felt by all, including those whose weekday activities do not normally involve any forbidden menachot. We see that the prohibition of muktzeh is rooted in the words of the Torah and the prophets, while its precise parameters and details are rabbinic. AHS.
Aruch HaShulchan.
As we said, the second reason is so that one will not end up doing Menachem on Shabbat. As with all mitzvot, the sages instituted safeguards in order to distance people from sin. The prohibition of muktzeh makes it less likely that people will carry objects in the public domain or use muktzeh items to perform melacha. Rambam and Avad and Mishnah Torah. The prohibition of muktzeh synchronizes the mind and the hands. Any item that one knows is not fit for use on Shabbat will not be touched by his hands either.
Okay, so it's amazing what he noticed that of these 39 categories of work, I mean, we've just learned all of them. We said that plowing could be done when you're maybe playing soccer in the field, or watering the plants, maybe when you when you eat and drink in the park, maybe you'll spill some water onto the grass and you'll make it grow. But it's not really.
It's not intentional.
It's not intentional. It's not really part of the way we live our lives nowadays. And if we're not going to, even if we were farmers, we don't go to the field. What are the chances? Except that you're not working. But this prohibition of muktzeh, this rabbinic prohibition of muktzeh, this applies to everybody. You're not going to handle objects. There's objects that you don't handle. So even if you're not a farmer, you're a lawyer or a doctor, you're not going to be picking up, electronic devices. You're not going to be touching expensive things which are not for Shabbat use. And so that really makes Shabbat more present for many people. It's truly felt by all, he says, because of this prohibition of muktzeh. And there is a root. It's based on, the biblical level, mitzvah to rest on Shabbat, and the prophets speaking about making our Shabbat day different. And then there's, of course, the rabbinic level, the clearly rabbinic level of, just trying to keep you away. Don't handle a pen because you might start to write with it, and that's a biblical prohibition. So that's like many of the rabbinic prohibitions to distance you from the actual biblical prohibitions. But so muktzeh is this larger category, as we're going to see. It's very one of a little child, for example. The most common thing you tell a child, Oh, don't hold that because it's muktzeh. Muktzeh. They hear the word muktzeh more than they hear don't cook or don't plow or don't write, because usually that's not. But there are many things that we handle things all the time in our houses, and the kids have to learn not to handle those items. So muktzeh becomes very present, very perhaps one of the most present laws that you hear about. Someone will tell you, "Oh, don't touch that," or don't give me that. That's muktzah, and that's a very common occurrence when practically living Shabbat. Of course, you have to not cook, but that you learn pretty quickly. Yes.
If somebody not very consciousness, like kids or whatever, turning the lights on in your bedroom on Friday night, and you come into your bedroom and you discover that somebody turned the lights on, it would be more of a valuation of Shabbat if you leave the lights on and sleep in them, or if you can turn them off. What do you think?
So we talked about it another day. You weren't here, but it's a good question. It happens a lot. Accidents happen. Sometimes you yourself turn on the light, and then the question is, what do I do now? Turning off the lights is asur. It's prohibited. But you want to be able to sleep on Shabbat. You need to sleep. That's part of the idea of Shabbat, is to rest. If you're going to not be able to sleep, then it's ruining your entire Shabbat. So the answer is that we have to be, we can't violate the Shabbat. But we talked about the different levels of prohibitions on Shabbat. There's the biblical level and a rabbinic level, and then doing things in the normal way versus in the abnormal way. We talked about a rabbinic prohibition of asking a non-Jew to do work for you. But in cases of need, we can be flexible when it comes to rabbinic prohibitions. And if it's doubly rabbinic, and it's so far removed from a Torah level prohibition, that, for example, if you ask a non-Jew to do it in a not usual way, so it's a doubly rabbinic, it's doubly removed from the Torah prohibition, that can be allowed for cases of great need or for the sake of a mitzvah. We also mentioned, and we haven't learned that chapter about children, but this is something we still have to cover. We skipped it, I think it was before. Bezrat Hashem, we'll talk about it in greater detail. Some people say that if you need to sleep and the lights are on, find a non-Jew, one option. Ask him, maybe not ask him directly, hint to him, I'm really trying to sleep here and the lights are bothering me. He'll naturally understand that he should just flick the switch. If you don't have a non-Jew, some people say you can use a small child. Small child, you just hold him up next to the light switch. Naturally, you don't have to tell him anything. He'll just start playing with whatever he sees and touching things, and he'll turn off the lights, and then you take him away quickly. It's best. We said even that it's best to do that not with your own child, but with someone else's child, because you have an obligation to refrain to make sure that your children don't violate the Shabbat either. But so it's more complicated with children, but that system does work. Other than that, if you can determine that the prohibition is only rabbinic, you have to know a little bit more, physics and electronics to know exactly what the appliance that you're talking about that you need to turn off is. If you can determine that it's absolutely rabbinic, and there's a great need, like we said with the air conditioner or the heater, there's room to be lenient for a Jew, an adult Jew, to do it with his elbow or something with an abnormal way. So there's room to be lenient with that. Although usually we should try to. You have to make sure that it's doubly rabbinic, and then you can do it yourself. But the best option is a non-Jew. Finding a Shabbos goy, we talked about it. But that's the short answer to your question. But muktzah is something else. Muktzah is for the most part, it's a rabbinic prohibition. That does happen. I thought that's what you were asking at first. Let's say you realized that on Shabbat you weren't thinking and you picked up the stapler or the electronic device or your phone. You realize, I put my phone in my pocket. Now it's muktzah. I shouldn't be handling it. So the law is that you don't have to drop it like that. You can once it's in your hand or once you're handling it, you can walk over to the side of the room or the table and put it down there. You don't have to drop it like it's fire or anything like that. You shouldn't be handling it, but once it's in your hands, you can continue and walk over to somewhere convenient and put it there. But that's, I thought, what you were asking. That would be more on topic about muktzah. But let's learn what is muktzah first of all. And we'll start now. We have a few minutes. 4 categories of muktzah. 4 types of muktzah. Okay? One type is called muktzah machamat gufo. Muktzah machamat gufo. What, Yaakov, will you read for us, please?
Muktzeh mahman gufon, inherently muktzeh, items that are not fitting for any use on Shabbat, such as rocks, trees, sand, animals, and inedible food, as explained below section. Muktzeh mahmat hershon case, mixeh because of monetary loss. Valuable objects that one takes care not to handle, except for their sole designated use, out of concern that they will be ruined. Since they have no use on Shabbat, one puts them out of his mind.
I would say that applies to a cello. Even if you're not a musician. Even if it wasn't a musical instrument, which we don't use on Shabbat. The fact that it's very expensive and very valuable. You would never use it to as a paperweight, just to make sure that the wind doesn't blow things away, right? Because it's expensive. It's also a violin, right? But also maybe an expensive device, like what else is an expensive device that you don't handle lightly? An expensive microscope. It's very sensitive. Right? So it's so expensive that you don't play with it. That's muktzeh, because it's called chesron kis, monetary loss. Okay, number 3, go ahead.
When one shoot a base for a forbidden object refers to a case where one places a muktzeh item on an object that is not itself muktzeh. Since he intends for it to remain there on Shabbat, he puts the base out of his mind as well, and it becomes muktzeh.
It too becomes muktzeh. Yeah, that's very interesting. That's an extension. Not only is for example, let's say candles, lit candles. You're not allowed to move them on Shabbat. They're muktzeh. Candles we don't light on Shabbat, so for sure they're muktzeh. But let's say you put down the tables, the candles on the table. Not only are you not allowed to move the candles, you're not allowed to move the table either. The table becomes a basis. Basis, that's the Hebrew word. Very similar to the English word, basis. It becomes a basis for the muktzeh item. So we see that muktzeh gets even, it expands to the items on which they're placed, if they're placed there intentionally, not if it's by accident. If you leave your laptop on your bed, by accident, usually you put the laptop on your table. But if you forgot and you move, because it's so movable, and you left it on your bed, and now you want to sleep, we're going to see that's the 4th type of muktzeh. And but let's say a laptop is prohibited, but it doesn't create a base because you didn't intend to leave it there on purpose. So it doesn't create a base. So the laws of what creates a basis, we have to see. We have to see that sections 5 and 6 below. And finally, the 4th category, go ahead.
Kelim shemalachtam le'isur, implements whose usage is forbidden, have a special status. Since they are designed to perform forbidden activities, one puts them out of his mind. On the other hand, sometimes they are used for permitted purposes. Therefore, one might not move them for their own sake, protect them le'etzocher atzman, but one might move them to use them permissibly, le'etzocher gufan, or because one needs the space they occupy.
Okay, the classic example we're going to see later is the hammer. The hammer is a tool for building. Building is prohibited on Shabbat. So a tool for something asur. That's called kli shemelachto leisur. It's an implement, a tool, whose usage is forbidden. But you know what? Sometimes you're allowed to move a hammer. Let's say you left the hammer on your couch, and now you want to sit down on the couch. You need its place. So that type of muktzeh you're allowed. A stone you're not allowed to move. even if it happens to be on your couch. But a hammer you are allowed to. I'm finishing up.
No,
Just
just make a short announcement.
please go ahead.
What are you doing here?
He's feeling better.
You're fulfilling the Mamar Chazal of Achash Begufo Yasok B'Torah.
That's right. If some of you don't feel well, you should study Torah, and I'll help you feel better. That's
Wow. I wanted to say to you, this morning I visited at the Grand Court Hotel in Eastern Yerushalayim, where the Menachem community is, and I spoke with the community leader, and I saw the lobby, and we're set to go at 2:45. So whoever can join us to volunteer. I brought some card games. Rabbi Menachem also probably has some others, and hopefully there'll be children there or adults there to talk with, to play with, and so on. So we like to leave here at 2:45 on the Metro. Is that what it's called?
No.
On the Rakevet Kala. On the Rakevet Kala.
Shakar, say it. So the hammer can place that it's taking up space that you need to use, or it can even be used. Let's say I want to crack open a coconut to eat. Sometimes I use a hammer. That can be, even though a hammer is usually used for building, which is prohibited, you're allowed to use it for something permitted. That's the fourth category of muktzah. We're going to review this and discuss each one of these four categories and see other practical examples of which, Bezrat Hashem, next week. And in the meantime, you'll just know the general idea that things not designated for Shabbat use, don't handle them. They're muktzah on Shabbat. We'll learn more details next week.